Fears of a new civil war in Lebanon as the capital Beirut sees its worst street violence in years. Nigeria says ISWAP leader Abu Musab al-Barnawi is dead. Tuberculosis deaths rise for the first time in more than a decade due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. In business, Nigeria's external debt stock is set to hit an all-time high of $45 billion. Kenya's police announced the arrest of husband and main suspect in the gruesome murder of female track star Agnes Tirop. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with me for this hour. And now the latest on Thursday's building fire in Taiwan, the island's worst fire in 26 years. 46 people have died and 41 are injured in the city of Kaohsiung. The fire broke out around 2 a.m. Thursday when most residents were sleeping. 5 authorities said the building was partly abandoned. It was built 40 years ago and used to house restaurants, karaoke lounges, and a cinema. More than 120 families live there, most of them elderly. Among the dead is one person from the Chinese mainland. Her identity was confirmed by a reporter of CGTN's parent company, China Media Group in Taiwan, at the request of her family on the mainland. Sung Hu Tong has the latest.
So the rescue work continued for more than 10 hours yesterday until 7 p.m. and the local fire department said yesterday that there were no more other casualties found at the scene, so they called it an end for the rescue work. However, after the rescue work, there are still some other work going on because, as you can see, behind me is the building that caught on fire. From the 1st to the 5th floors, they were covered with glass walls. That's why it is after the walls were heavily damaged and there are glass fragments everywhere on the walls or on the ground. So it's very dangerous not only for passersby but also for investigators at the scene. That's why from yesterday early evening, there were workers gathered here to fix this and to cleaning up the fire scene for passersby or for further investigation. And speaking of investigation, there was a prosecutor came to the fire scene this morning telling us that the prosecution is going on, and yesterday 4 people were caught for interrogation, while one of them has already been identified as a possible suspect. However, it still needs more evidence and investigation to make sure that this suspect is the one. And according to the prosecutor, she came to the scene today to make sure or to be more cautious about the following prosecution process.
At least 6 people have been killed and dozens injured in the Lebanese capital during protests over an investigation into last year's port explosion. Gunfire erupted in Beirut on Thursday during demonstrations organized by Hezbollah and its allies against the judge leading the probe into the blast. CGTN's Timothy Ulrich has more.
The worst violence Lebanon has seen in 18 years. Bullets riddled buildings in Beirut. At least one person was killed in their apartment by a stray round. Residents said it sparked memories of a dark chapter in the country's history.
This scene took us back to the 1975 Civil War. I was 10 or 11 years old. The same scene, video and pictures playing in my head since I was a kid. Now it's repeating.
Hezbollah and its ally, the Shiite Amal movement, said the Lebanese forces fired the first shot at protesters. The Lebanese Forces Party is one of the largest Christian factions in parliament. It denies involvement and has condemned the violence. Interior Minister Bassam Malawi says fighting broke out after rooftop snipers began firing on demonstrators.
The conflict started with the first bullet shot, and the shooting felt like it was done by snipers because there were shots directly to people's heads.
The protest began over a probe into last year's port explosion in Beirut, which killed more than 210 people and devastated parts of the capital. Protest organizers say the lead investigator into the incident, Judge Tarek Bitar, is politically biased. Hezbollah and Amal called for his removal after he issued a police warrant for a politician who filed a complaint against the judge. Lebanese President Michael Aoun vowed to hold those who started the violence accountable, and he said the probe will get to the bottom of who was behind the blast.
I will ensure the investigation reaches the truth of what happened in order to hold those responsible to account like any other judicial investigation, including the investigation into the crime of the port blast.
The violent clashes have underscored the country's mounting problems. Lebanon's economy is in tatters. It faces runaway inflation, and there are fuel shortages and rolling blackouts, just to name a few. All these issues combine into a potent mix that could spill over into further violence, the last thing Lebanon needs. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
China is expected to launch another crewed mission to its Tiangong space station at 12:23 a.m. Saturday, Beijing time. The Shenzhou 13 will carry 3 taikonauts for a 6-month stay on Tiangong. Wang Yakping will become the first woman to visit the CSS. China aims to complete the construction of Tiangong by the end of next year.
So far, China's space program has launched 7 manned flights, each of which has been an innovation and a leap forward.
As an astronaut, I'm very proud to be part of this mission. I'm so proud of our great nation and this great time.
I also look forward to the day colleagues from across the globe can travel to space together and be welcomed on China's space station.
Nigeria's military has confirmed the death of Abu Musab al-Barnawi, the leader of the terrorist group Islamic State West Africa Province. The African nation has been waging war against the insurgency since 2009 and claims to be winning the war with its consistent onslaught against the terrorists. Phil Ihaza reports from Abuja, the country's capital.
Abu Musab al-Barnawi was reported to have been killed last month by locals in Borno State, northeast Nigeria, but this is the first time it's been confirmed by the Nigerian military. Top military commander and Chief of Defense Staff, General Lucky Irabor, confirmed the news but did not give details on how exactly al-Barnawi was killed or when it happened.
Of course, I can authoritatively confirm to you that al-Barnawi is dead. As soon as that, he's dead and remains dead. Insecurity or threat, as it were, either terrorism, banditry, or any form of criminality, they are not confined to boundaries. And this is the reason why when we speak to issues that have to do with our national security, it's placed in context with our neighbors. Because if all is well at home and all is not well with our neighbors, then of course we can't have peace. So this is the reason why collectivism has become an approach in this regard.
The group ISWAP has not confirmed the death, but the news is coming months after Abubakar Shekau, the leader of rival faction Boko Haram, was confirmed dead in May. Al-Barnawi was the son of the founder of Nigeria's Boko Haram militant group, Mohammed Yusuf. The insurgents have waged a war against the Nigerian state for nearly 12 years now. According to the United Nations, more than 35,000 people have been killed and over 2 million more displaced from their homes since the war began. The Nigerian government says it has intensified attacks on insurgents, dealing a big blow to the group. So far, officials say more than 6,000 of them, including their families, have laid down their arms and surrendered. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Let's bring in Dixon Osagie, a security consultant. He joins us from Lagos. Dixon, welcome to Africa Live. Thank you for joining us here on the program. Now, under Barnawi's leadership, ISWAP made territorial gains in northern Nigeria and the wider Chad Basin. What are the implications of his death on Nigeria and the wider West African region?
All right, thank you very much. The death of al-Barnawi is coming as a good news to the Nigerian public. The Chief of Army Staff yesterday confirms that he is dead and remains dead. that simply means that there's no possibility of his resurrection, because we've seen in previous time where we have terrorist leaders being killed again and again. But this time around, the Chief of Defense Staff, the #1 soldier in Nigeria, has confirmed to the world that al-Bawani is dead and remains dead. This is a good one coming to the Nigerian public, and we believe that it's going to dissipate the morale of the fighters in the northeast and the Lake Chad and other parts of the state that are constituting nuisance to the sovereignty of Nigeria. So the death of al-Bawani is going to really assist the military in its own tactical, operational, and strategic operation. And we've seen a lot of people, dropping arms. Over 13,000 have dropped their arms in the past 2 weeks, renouncing the cause of their movement. That is a good one. But however, I have warned the government of Nigeria to be very careful of deception, because when it comes to terrorism, it is an ideological-driven war, and any ideological-driven war could be deceptive and could also last till eternity. So we must be careful about those guys that are coming back to the society on the guise that they've repented from their ill activities.
All right, he's dead and remains dead. Very interesting statements there. Let's unpack that a little more. There have been also reports that over 13,000 suspected terrorists surrendered to troops in 2 weeks, as you've mentioned. Now, this fight against insurgency in the country seems to have gathered momentum. What do you attribute the current success to?
Well, I attribute the current success to the military because in the previous time, there is no proper coordination between the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. Basically, in the front line there in the Northeast, the Army and the Air Force needs to synergize themselves and go before the enemy. Each time the Air Force carry out bombardment, we had expected the ground troops and the Army to go for territorial cleansing. If the Air Force deliver the deliverables in the enemy camps, what the Army needs to do is to go and cleanse the environment to ensure that there is no remnant of these terrorists still withstanding the survival of the bombardment. But here we suffer a lot of integration between the Air Force and the Army in the previous time. But luckily enough, the present service chiefs have a lot of coordination, well cooperated. They are well cooperated, and for that, because without cooperation and coordination, I don't think there will be success in the battlefield. So from my own observation, I have seen that they are doing so well tactically because a lot of ambush, the Nigerian military suffered a lot of ambush in the hands of this ISWAP. And this time around, they are going all hard to activate a full-blown war against the ISWAP. And they are really, really finding it so hard to carry out their movement. So the military are carrying out the resourcing mechanism, cutting off their supplies of weapons, cutting off their supplies of food, cutting off their supply of fuel and diesel. And this time around, those guys in the front line, they are frustrated. And I think that is the reason why a majority of them are surrendering to the high firepower of the Nigerian military.
All right, Dixon Osagie, let's leave it there for now. The Nigerian military and government really waging war against insurgency. We appreciate your insight and perspective. Moving along, the chairperson of the African Union Commission says 11 member states have held successful elections in the last 9 months. The chairperson acknowledged the unconstitutional government changes had also taken place in 3 African states, namely Guinea, Mali, and Niger.
2 member states of the African Union have successfully transferred power to opposition parties. We need to be in the news more about the commitment of our member states to strengthen the consolidation of democracy. So what we see in some member states in terms of unconstitutional changes of government should not reflect our character as the African Union. Despite the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, 11 countries have held elections as scheduled.
5 biracial women born in the Democratic Republic of Congo are suing the Belgian state for crimes against humanity. The women were separated from their African families when the country was under colonial Belgian rule. They were then placed in a religious mission in the Katende in the province of Kasai. The move is aimed at compelling Belgium to take responsibility for changes and challenges faced by mixed-race children during this time. Belgian authorities ruled over what is now the DRC from 1908 to 1960. The case is currently being examined by a court in Brussels. The lawsuit comes amid growing calls for Belgium to reassess its colonial past. The women have requested compensation of about $58,000 each.
We were seen as horrible, just horrible, a problem for the colonial project. The problem was also that we were considered children of the state. It was not the mother who exercised power, it was the state that was allowed to exercise power. And in that sense, they were free to do as they pleased.
On behalf of the Belgian federal government, I apologize for the Métis of Belgian colonial origin and their families for the injustice and their suffering.
Stay tuned, the news continues on Africa Live. Here's what's ahead. The U.S. commits 17 million COVID vaccine doses to the African Union. Tuberculosis deaths rise for the first time in more than a decade due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent, to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Syria,
Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. An advisory panel for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration is recommending Moderna COVID-19 booster shots. It's also considering the Johnson & Johnson vaccine for the same. Owen Fairclough has the latest.
Many of them routinely interact with more than 2 million passengers at U.S. airports every day. But the head of the Transportation Security Administration told CNN that 40% of its staff remain unvaccinated against COVID-19, even as a deadline looms to have a shot or potentially lose their jobs. Even though legal battles continue over vaccine mandates, the Delta variant that's torn through the US this summer is at least now trending down.
Nationally, daily cases are down 47%. Hospitalizations are down 38% over the past 6 weeks. Over the past 2 weeks, most of the country has improved as well. Case rates are declining in 39 states, and hospital rates are declining in 38 states.
And vaccination numbers are improving. Since drug maker Pfizer received approval for a third booster shot, nearly 9 million of them have been administered, while just over 66% of the eligible US population is now fully vaccinated against COVID. In another sign of confidence, the US will fully reopen its land borders with both Canada and Mexico from next month for fully vaccinated travellers. This, as an advisory panel to the Food and Drug Administration, endorsed Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine booster shots for seniors and other high-risk groups. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
U.S. President Joe Biden has pledged to donate over 17 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine to the African Union. This is in efforts to boost vaccination programs across the African continent. He said this while meeting with his Kenyan counterpart, President Uhuru Kenyatta, on Thursday. The AU has previously raised concerns over lack of access to COVID-19 vaccines from manufacturers. Of the 5.7 billion doses of coronavirus vaccines administered around the world by mid-September, only 2% had been in Africa. The 17 million doses Biden has pledged are on top of the 50 million the United States has already donated to the African Union. The White House says the jabs are available for immediate delivery and will be dispatched in the coming weeks.
And I'm proud to announce that today that we're making an additional historic one-time donation of 17 more million doses of J&J vaccine to the AU. And we're going to be sending some more by the end of the year to Kenya. Our nations share a deep commitment to fairness and to respect and equity, and I'm committed to further elevating our ties with Kenya and nations across Africa as a whole. But Kenya is the key to this.
Happy to hear your new announcement of that increase, because as many of you will know, as a continent, we are lagging well behind the rest of the world in terms of being able to vaccinate our people. So any additional support, like the President has just mentioned, is greatly welcomed, and we look forward to that continued partnership.
Burundi, one of the last countries in the world to inoculate its people against COVID-19, has received its first batch of vaccines. The East African country took delivery of 500,000 donated doses of China's Sinopharm jabs. The Burundi Health Ministry has announced the inoculation exercise will begin next week. Burundi's leadership had previously downplayed the severity of the pandemic. The country's change of heart now leaves the largely closed-off nation of Eritrea as the only African country yet to launch vaccination campaigns.
China highly appreciates the measures taken by the Burundian government against COVID-19 and will follow its efforts to accompany Burundian friends in this fight.
These vaccines are licensed by the WHO, and as the ambassador also pointed out, the vaccine does not replace hygiene and barrier measures. This is very important. I would also like to thank the Chinese people for other forms of cooperation in the field of health.
The World Health Organization is reporting that after almost a decade of successfully tackling tuberculosis, cases of the infectious disease are on the rise again. This setback may potentially begin undoing years of progress towards eradicating the treatable disease. Consequently, the WHO is calling for increased efforts in terms of investment and innovation to save millions of lives. The issue has been linked to disruptions in the health sector caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, this is because of a growing number of tuberculosis cases. They are going undiagnosed and untreated. Additionally, health funds have been redirected towards the pandemic. Others have struggled to access medical services because of restrictive measures implemented to lower COVID-19 infection rates.
While 66 million lives were saved due to TB prevention and care since the year of 2000, the COVID-19 pandemic has reversed years of progress and efforts in the fight against tuberculosis. For the first time in over a decade, WHO is reporting an increase in tuberculosis deaths. Tuberculosis is the world's second top infectious killer after COVID-19, claiming close to 4,100 lives a day. Approximately 1.5 million people died from TB in 2020, including more than...
A new study in Uganda claims that the parasite that causes malaria has developed resistance to the primary drug used to treat the disease. Now, while that remains a concern, the development of a malaria vaccine has got experts optimistic. Leon Sinyenge reports.
Slivia Nachigude's daughter has been unwell for days. The nurse here says it's mild malaria that her little one is suffering from. That has got Nachigude very worried.
We are doing our best to treat her. The nurse has been helpful.
Nachigude is lucky to get treatment early. malaria remains a major public health problem in Uganda. According to health statistics, Uganda is one of 6 African countries that account for more than half of all malaria cases worldwide.
We being here at the equator, the weather is as good for us as it is for the mosquitoes. So mosquitoes can produce with abandon and therefore using the other strategies that are currently on without reinventing the wheel is one way of trying to eliminate.
Interventions like the use of mosquito nets, anti-malaria medicines and indoor residue spraying have been strongly promoted in Uganda. However, a recent study on drug resistance to artemisinin-based treatments has triggered concern among experts.
What has been demonstrated is that there are genetic resistance markers which have been detected in Uganda. Earlier it was detected even in Rwanda. Yeah. So we are trying to up our game to see how we can contain this.
The World Health Organization this month endorsed the use of the world's first malaria vaccine, Mosquirix. It is already a welcome relief in the fight against malaria.
This particular vaccine has potential of reducing severe malaria by 50%. And when it works in combination with other interventions, it has potential to reduce it by up to 90%. You reduce severe malaria by 90%, you deal with deaths. So, game changer indeed.
The WHO has recommended the widespread rollout of the vaccine across Africa. Health officials say they are working out a plan to access the vaccine whenever it will be available. And with its efficacy, there is hope it could help bring about a zero malaria rate in the most affected countries. Leon Sanyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Kenya has successfully controlled its desert locust invasion, and that's according to the Food and Agricultural Organization. In 2019, Kenya experienced its worst invasion in 70 years. The FAO said the East African nation was considered locust-free in late August 2021, as CGTN's Joy Karuki Juma tells us.
The desert locust invasion.
When the locust invasion came to this country, it was a menace. We would hear it all over the news, on the televisions.
The food security of thousands of people was at risk in the country. The pests devoured the crops and pastures at a devastating speed.
When a family goes to the farm and what they had farmed has been eaten up by the desert locust, this means there is going to be hunger. Our children cannot go to school hungry.
The Kenya government was supported by the Food and Agriculture Organization to contain the locusts. Over 1,000 community scouts, environment, health and safety experts, agricultural officers and members of the National Youth Service were trained to stop the invasion.
We were trained on how to gather information on their behavior, on their movement, and how to even fight them.
The data NYS gathered was sent to the country's Desert Locust Information Service using FAO's handheld GPS-based data recording and transmission device. The device is designed for use in difficult and remote locations where monitoring and network is a challenge.
This was a very good experience. Since this desert locust menace came into our country, the National Youth Service has been in the forefront, and the delivery has been so well, because if the National Youth Service didn't go outside there, the kind of destruction that we would have experienced would have been vast. Now, it was timely that we went outside there, and the delivery was, I can say, 100%.
Kenyan locals were also trained how to harvest locusts. The pests were milled for the production of animal feed and organic fertilizer. Through efforts like this, FAO and governments in East Africa say they saved some 4.4 million metric tons of cereals from destruction. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
And do not go away, because we're coming right back with your business segment. Here's what's ahead. Coming up in business, Nigeria's external debt stock is set to hit an all-time high of $45 billion. And Tunisia's GDP is expected to grow by 2.9% this year.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Nigeria's external debt stock is set to hit an all-time high of $45 billion following the government's request for Parliament to approve fresh financing to fund its budget deficit. Authorities there are seeking of a fresh external tune of $5 billion from the World Bank, French Development Agency, and Exim Bank. Nigeria is facing one of its toughest climbing out of a second in a less than 5 years. The World Bank says the West African country is about 6% last year, making it the lowest in the world. Tunisia's gross domestic product is expected to grow by 2.9% in 2021 after contracting by 11.5% last year. According to the World Bank, the North African state needs to reform its public finances to stabilize its pandemic-hit economy and boost recovery. From Tunis, here is CGTN's Adnan Chouachi with the details.
Tunisia's economy is expected to grow in 2021 as the pandemic wanes amid mass rollout of COVID-19 vaccines. The World Bank has called for authorities to carry out speedy reforms and solve the logistical problems that paralyze investment and exports in a bid to strengthen Tunisia's image as an investment destination and also boost economic diplomacy.
The state is encouraging investment by offering incentives in order to increase the volume of goods and services produced in the country after the pandemic. Tunisia needs domestic and foreign investment to create national wealth and add value while reducing unemployment.
Analysts say that the MENA region, including Tunisia, was hardly prepared to respond to the outbreak of COVID-19 due to its long-term socio-economic conditions and underfunded public health systems.
The socio-economic situation has worsened. The World Bank insists on improving these conditions while supporting the vital health sector. All successive governments in Tunisia have failed to address these problems. We urge the new premier and her cabinet to find urgent solutions by providing funding to the health system.
Experts assert that the region's recovery will also depend on a rapid and equitable rollout of vaccines. According to the health department in Tunisia, the number of fully vaccinated people has reached 4.2 million in the North African state.
The health situation was catastrophic and now it's improving. I urge all Tunisians to get vaccinated in order to resume a normal life. The economy will not rebound without vaccination.
The World Bank insists on the need to work to limit the country's major financial imbalances and to optimize state subsidies and to direct them towards the poor and needy families. The Washington-based lender has recently pledged to continue supporting Tunisia's pandemic-hit economy.
In March 2021, the World Bank approved $100 million to support the fight against COVID-19 and the vaccination operation in Tunisia. The international institution also allocated $300 million in favor of 1 million Tunisian families. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
A supply chain crisis around the world in the UK. The port of Felixstowe has run out of storage space for containers amid a shortage of heavy goods, vehicle drivers, and a surge in imports ahead of Christmas. Now, while in California, there has been a long-standing congestion with container ships waiting weeks to offload. Andrew Wilson has more. Let's take a look.
Britain, it seems, is not alone. The container jams, like the one at Felixstowe Port, are being seen around the world. In the UK, there are added domestic complications with HGV drivers and so on, but it's clear now that everyone is wrestling with a global supply chain crisis.
I wanted to take a moment to reflect on the work that we started.
In Washington, G7 finance ministers wrapped up proceedings in agreement that they faced a global challenge that was best tackled together.
Well, I tell people you should be reassured that we're doing absolutely everything we can to mitigate some of these challenges. They are global in nature, so we can't fix every single problem, but I feel confident that there'll be good provision of goods for everybody, and we are working our way to remove blockages where we can.
The headline crisis is perhaps the long-standing congestion in California, where an armada of container ships lies idle, waiting weeks to offload in Los Angeles and Long Beach. The White House has now announced a new 24/7 shift pattern to tackle it, with a clear presidential call to national transportation networks to step up as well.
The rest of the world is closing in, and we risk losing our edge if we don't step up. In order to be globally competitive, we need to improve our capacity to make things here in America, while also moving finished products across the country and around the world. We need to think big and bold.
Shipping costs are 5 times what they were last year. In the UK, the lack of truck drivers is biting hard, and analysts are still predicting a difficult winter. Global or not, the government is choosing to remain buoyant in public.
Well, the situation is improving. I'm confident that people will be able to get their toys for Christmas. As I say, I quite understand why people are concerned by these headlines, but we are working through these challenges as we have worked through other challenges.
But there's no doubt that the pandemic has unearthed some extraordinary weaknesses in how the world does business, and collateral damage in some sectors will be unavoidable. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
The IMF and the World Bank want to see more countries led efforts to counter climate change. It's a central theme of their annual meetings, happening just a few weeks before the COP26 UN Climate Summit kicks off. A wide range of high-profile speakers spoke on how countries and businesses should be acting and what the financial solutions should look like. Caroline Malone reports from Washington.
Climate change is one of the defining challenges of our time, and making climate action count was the hot topic at the IMF World Bank meetings on Thursday. The impacts of climate change are already being felt around the world, with a rise in sea levels causing dangerous floods and storm surges, putting large groups of people at risk. World climate leaders are pushing for more private sector financial support.
What we've been working on is getting the best of the private sector committed to net zero transition. Big banks, insurers, asset managers, asset owners. The number as we speak today is $90 trillion of balance sheet committed for that. And that's not for some distant date. It's near-term 5-year commitments, fair share of the 50% reduction by 2030. So now the challenge is, how do we marry that capital, that commitment, with where it's needed most, channel it to those emerging and developing economies?
US President Biden has announced plans for more alternative energy sources this week, approving the nation's first commercial offshore wind farm off the northeast coast. While on the west coast, cities like Los Angeles are well known for traffic contributing to transport emissions. There's a push to make California state carbon neutral by 2045.
People in central Vietnam went through
The effects of climate change are being felt more intensely in developing economies, especially those in extreme weather-hit regions.
There are many more people right now aware that, oh, it's climate change. But most of them would say, well, there's nothing much I can do about it.
Government and policymakers are looking at commitments to cap a rise in temperatures globally ahead of COP26. The IMF and World Bank participants agree that more needs to be done, especially amongst the largest economies, to prevent a catastrophic rise in temperatures. Caroline Malone, CGTN, Washington.
The second United Nations Global Sustainable Transport Conference is ringing a similar alarm in Beijing. Industry experts and officials are discussing solutions for sustainable transport across the world. CGTN Zhu Zhou has the story.
Data from the World Bank shows that the global transition from traditional to sustainable transport alone will save $70 trillion by 2050, taking into account transport costs such as fuel, operating expenses, and losses due to traffic jams. Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a keynote speech via video at the opening ceremony of the conference. He says that access to transport is the first step in a region's development.
We should leverage the enabling role of transport and increase related import in poor regions so that local economies and people's lives could improve as a result of better roads. We should enhance North-South and South-South cooperation and scale up support for developing transport infrastructure in the least developed countries and landlocked developing countries in an effort to achieve common prosperity.
In his address via video link, Russian President Vladimir Putin says that Russia will continue to strengthen its leading position in the global aviation sector.
Particular role in Russia has always been given to aviation. Aviation sometimes is the only link that guarantees transport accessibility for hard-to-reach regions. That is why we are doing our utmost to support regional and local air carriers, first and foremost, to serve those living in the polar regions and the Far East. In 2021, the amount of resources invested in this was $255 million for 417 regional routes for domestic flights.
Looking forward, the conference is expected to indicate a way to help achieve the objective of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change in the Decade of Action. Zhu Zhu, CGTN, Beijing.
Time now for a short break. Here's what's ahead. UN Conference on Biodiversity concludes today in southwest China's Kunming.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival, and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In southwest China, a UN conference on protecting the world's biological diversity, it's entering its last day. Our reporter Tao Yuan has more.
This is actually just the first phase of the COP15 conference, because we know that this is a conference that's been postponed repeatedly because of the pandemic. And even this time, again, because of the pandemic, world leaders and heads of states actually didn't come here. They met virtually. They convened virtually online for discussions, while some diplomats and NGOs and environmentalists came here physically to Kunming for discussion. So this is just the first phase. There's going to be a second and final phase next year, next April and May. where everybody's going to come for more substantial discussions. And the most important result coming out of the second and final round of the discussion is what's known as a post-2020 framework, which is basically a biodiversity version of the Paris Climate Agreement. Concrete goals are going to be set out in that agreement. Things like how much wild area, how much land and sea that we're going to restore in the next decade, how many species that we're going to remove from the threatened list, and how many more people that we're going to make sure have access to clean water and air and things like that. 21 goals as it stands now in the draft. And things like this actually take rounds and rounds of negotiations because different countries are at different developmental stages, and we need to make sure that everyone's on board with this agreement. Everyone thinks that these goals are achievable. Not everyone's going to be happy with the goals. What's more important is feasibility and implementation as the world now come to the realization that the loss of biodiversity is an existential crisis for mankind on par with climate change, and not just action on a government level, but also on an individual level. You and me, what we eat, what we buy, all have consequences.
The use of chemicals in crop spraying is vital to prevent pests and diseases. However, many farmers lack knowledge on their usage and safety, which increases the risk to biodiversity, especially through the application of dangerous chemicals. CGTN's Nick Mundima has more on that.
Agriculture has played a significant part in the loss of biodiversity, even as the world is trying to minimize that. Agricultural chemical inputs denote the different types of chemical applications in production, such as pesticides that include natural and biological chemical fertilizers. Capacity building has been a problem. Many farmers have gone commercial, and use of these chemicals have triggered biodiversity loss.
Because of the current sort of food system that we have, I mean, not just here, but around the world, there's a big gap between the person who's growing your food and the person who's buying that food. And so from the farmer's perspective, if I'm going to spray pesticides on my tomatoes here today, it's going to the market. I don't know who's buying it in the market or when. It's not my problem. And so we really need this sort of extension knowledge support for farmers, and we ultimately need this backing at national and at county government level for these alternative food systems.
Pesticides are often considered a quick, easy and inexpensive solution for controlling weeds and insect pests in urban landscapes. However, they always come at a significant cost, and accumulation of contaminants decreases the quality and quantity of food. Pesticides can contaminate soil, water, turf and other vegetation. In addition to killing insects or weeds, pesticides can be toxic to a host of other organisms, including birds, fish, beneficial insects and non-target plants. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, the economic impact of pesticides on non-target species, including humans, has been estimated at approximately $8 billion annually in developing countries. The ongoing Biodiversity Conference seeks to push the agenda of protecting and restoring biodiversity, which is key and fundamental in addressing issues including climate, health, food and water security. Nick Mundima, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
A South African artist is helping clean up its neighborhood by using trash to create beautiful home pieces and accessories. Shishle Shubangu has found purpose for both discarded soda cans and non-indigenous trees, which can upset the biodiversity of an environment. CGTN's Julie Shire takes a look.
Talented artist and designer Shishle Shubangu runs his self-funded workshop in the midst of the rolling hills of Mpumalanga Township. It's here that he creates African-styled ornaments and jewelry from trash lying around.
Women who collect cans in the community, they bring them here and we pay with them more than what they actually get from the scrap dealers. And they benefit and we also benefit because we bring value to that waste. So all these cans that they collect were just cans. Now we turn them into artworks and beautiful crafts that we can resell.
Shubangu created a makeshift foundry to melt the aluminium cans and repurpose them.
We crush them and we put them into our foundry. After they get melted down, we pour them into different molds that allow us to get different shapes, different metal shapes out of them. So basically this can get turned into something like this. This is a African wood inspired walking stick. It's a modern type of walking stick.
He's added wood from invasive species trees to his designs.
So instead of just cutting it down and turning it into firewood, we might as well turn it into something valuable. So we make these trays. These are bases for clocks, a small clock, and coasters as well. So it's not only good for us, but it's good for the environment.
Shabangu has big ambitions for his business despite a slowdown through the lockdown. He's hoping a move to the lowest level of lockdown will change this.
We're going to need help from small businesses as well as government to actually just push us through. There will always be rubbish, there will always be waste, and there will always be unemployed people. So it's a no-brainer that you get unemployed people to turn waste into something valuable.
Most of South Africa's trash still ends up in landfills, but artists like Shabangu could help keep trash out of dumps, which in turn could create much-needed jobs. Jilishara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
And we are not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Here's a peek at the headlines. Kenya police announced the arrest of husband and main suspect in the gruesome murder of female track star Agnes Tirop.
How would you create